we got it doing all the things. We added foundation and one CSS rule. But everything is in one rather huge function at this point. And there's a lot of redundancy in there, and it's just plain hard to read. So let's break it up a bit. Shall we? So the first part was to extract the color display into its own function. So here's what I did. I made a function called renderColor. It takes the color as an argument, any color. And then the rest of this code is pretty much exactly what was down below. And then we return that. And then we call renderColor and append the result to color item instead of just doing all of these lines right there in line. So cut down on this at least a tiny bit. And I didn't call the argument favorite color here because there's no reason it has to be favorite color. If we added a least favorite color button, we could use the same function, right? So also, we can test this in isolation. Once we've written that, if we haven't changed handle submit yet, we want to make sure this function works. Open up the console. Say renderColor cornflower blue. Yay, we get back a div with just what we expected, right? Lovely. Cool. Everybody do it similarly. Everybody make it take an argument. Anybody try to just get the form value directly from within here? Okay, good. Yeah, this thing's job is to make a div of that color, and it doesn't need to know anything about why we're even doing it. It doesn't need to know it's because of form input or anything. This thing's job is just to make that div with the supplied color. Next part of the homework was to build the list items in a separate function. So right now we have 3 list items, right? Name item, age item, and color item. And color item throws us off a little. If it weren't for that, this would be really easy because we could just set the text content of all of them. And there are a few ways you could deal with this. I did ask you not to use inner HTML. If you had to resort to inner HTML to make this work, I understand. If you used inner HTML instead of text content, then you could totally just put the HTML of the div in there. So here's how I did it. Down in, well, let's just look at this thing in isolation first. So I made render list item take 2 arguments, the label of the thing and the value. Make sense? You're not sure how to make it work. Think first, what information does it need from the outside? It needs to know what it's going to say before the colon, and it needs to know what comes next, right? Now, for most of them, the value is going to be a string. I don't know if you tried using append child on a string, but it doesn't work, does it? If I have a div, append child is great. If I try, heck, I can just do it here. My div, append child. Hey, hey, hey. Boo. Failed to execute append child on node. Parameter 1 is not of type node. So the argument to append child has to be one of a couple of things. Either an HTML element or a text node. So just a string won't do if you're using append child. So a text node is how text is actually represented in the DOM. The text content, of course, just turns that into a string or accepts a string as input. Append child does not. So we could have dealt with this by turning all the strings into text nodes or something. That would have been fine. The way I decided to do it this time is to use try catch. Has anyone used something like that in another language where you attempt something and if there's an error or an exception, it does something else? So we have that structure in JavaScript. Try item append child value. And if this is the div, that's going to work. If it doesn't, then it's going to run the catch block. And an exception is going to be passed in as an argument to that block. And in that case, we just append that value to the text content because we know it's a string. And notice when I put the label up here, I put colon and then a space. So I didn't have to throw a space here. Make sense? Yeah.
What's the difference between a pin child and then just adding something to it?
Just adding something to it, by that you mean?
Plus equals, just literally adding it in your catch.
The difference is a pin child can't take a string as an argument. Yeah, so if the value is a string, like the age and the name are, because what I did was I actually made the value I pass in for the color is not the color. That's too much information for this thing. I want this to just know this is the thing I need to put inside there. So it's already the div by the time it reaches here. Make sense? So I wanted this to be able to take either an HTML element or a string as its value. So I made it work by using a try catch. So we could test that again in isolation. I could say render list item. There we go. Dog breed corgi. Whoops, I didn't refresh the page. Yay, it works. Dog breed colon space corgi. I could document create element. Anything. A UL. Oops, and probably help if I say that to a variable. And then I could say my list in here. And that works too. It'll be happy to put an HTML element or a string in there. Thanks to our try catch. Now I did some other fanciness here. So obviously you need to call this 3 times, right? So you need some sort of loop. But I didn't want to use a for loop. But anyway, you have to have something to loop over, right? So we need to put all of the stuff from the form into an array or something. Who did that? Who made a loop out of this thing? Did anybody do this part of the homework at all? Anybody make render list item? You just manually call it 3 times? Yeah. Why what? I'm sorry?
I guess I did it a little differently, but I didn't put a name or color. I just made it look at the type attribute and then see what it was and then act accordingly. But would that be worse than this in a way? Because then we would have to, if we added another thing, then we would have to add another else each time?
This is a little more flexible. But that's a pretty good idea too. No, you can if you want to, but you don't feel like you have to. We're not gonna move on with this project anyway. So, yeah, that's fine. That's another way to do it. So, I didn't want to actually call this manually 3 times. Not that 3 times is all that many. But here's what I did. You know about objects in JavaScript? If you did all the Code Wars stuff, you had to run across them. Sorry, Code Academy doesn't cover objects. We didn't realize that when we put together the prereqs, because it used to. The old version did. So objects are another kind of collection, a bit like arrays.